You need to come home. It's about your father.
3 weeks ago, she sat in a chair she had bought with her own salary, in a house she had furnished with her own hands, and she listened to a voicemail she had not expected to receive. The jeweler's voice was measured and professional. He explained that the piece consigned to his shop, a gold locket with a hand-engraved lily on the back, had been flagged as a stolen item. The police had been called. And the name on the consignment form, he said carefully, was her mother's. Margaret set the phone on the table. The afternoon light came through the window in one long stripe across the floor. She had not touched that locket in 14 months, because it had not been hers to touch. It had belonged to her grandmother. It still did. Before she tells you what came after, she would ask only this. If you have ever watched something precious disappear because someone assumed it was theirs to take, stay with her. Leave your city and the time in the comments below. She finds it a comfort to know who is listening. And if this story already feels familiar, not the details, but the weight of it, please take a moment to like and subscribe, not as a favor, but because stories about quiet courage deserve to be found by the people who need them most. Margaret grew up in a 2-story colonial in Dayton, Ohio, the kind of house that looked settled and permanent from the street. Her father, Robert, was an insurance adjuster who had spent 30 years building a reputation for even-handedness at work and spending very little of it at home. Her mother, Diane, taught 4th grade 3 days a week and spent the remaining 4 days curating the image of a family that was doing better than it was. There were 2 daughters. Margaret was the elder by 4 years. Her sister, Christine, arrived in the family the way certain weather arrives, all at once, demanding full attention and not inclined to apologize for it. From the beginning, the household oriented itself around Christine. This was not something anyone announced. It revealed itself in the texture of ordinary days. When Christine auditioned for the school play and got a speaking part, Diane called 3 relatives before dinner. When Margaret was named to the honor roll 3 semesters in a row, Diane nodded and said that was what she had expected. The way someone confirms a train is on time. Not with pleasure, only with the absence of surprise. The Christmas when Margaret was 15 made the arrangement visible in a way that could not be unmade. She had asked for a specific watercolor pencil set she had seen at the craft store on 5th Street. Christine had asked for, among other things, a new bicycle. Margaret came downstairs that morning and found the bicycle gleaming beneath the tree with a large red bow, and beside her own name, a small package that contained a bath set she had not asked for. She thanked her parents and spent the afternoon helping Christine learn to ride the bike. That was simply what a person did. There was one person in the family who seemed to see Margaret clearly. Her grandmother, Evelyn Calloway, lived 40 minutes away in a small craftsman bungalow she had occupied for 38 years. She had retired from teaching music and spent her later years in the quiet company of her garden, her books, and her late husband's record collection. Evelyn did not perform affection. She expressed it in particular ways: a Tuesday phone call, a tin of shortbread left on the porch, a handwritten note in a birthday card that said something real rather than something decorative. When Margaret was 17, Evelyn gave her a small gold locket on a fine chain. It had a lily engraved on the back. Evelyn's middle name was Lily, a detail most of the family had forgotten. Evelyn said only that she wanted Margaret to have it, because Margaret was the only person in the family who had ever sat still long enough to listen. Margaret wore it to her high school graduation and to her college interviews. She stopped wearing it when the chain needed repair and placed it in a small cedar box on her dresser. She left for college the following September. The box remained in her childhood room, unobtrusive and certain, the way some important things are. The pattern that had been visible in childhood did not soften when Margaret grew older. It adapted. The first time she noticed it as an adult was at her college graduation, the spring she turned 22. Her parents drove up for the ceremony. Her father shook her hand and said she had worked hard. Her mother spent the reception telling the other parents about Christine's acceptance to a performing arts conservatory, a program Christine had applied to on a late deadline and had not yet confirmed she would attend. Margaret had graduated summa cum laude. She stood with her diploma and listened to her mother describe Christine's acceptance in the same tone some people use to announce a birth. The second time was 3 years later, when her father had a health scare serious enough to warrant an overnight hospital stay. Margaret drove 4 hours to be present. She sat with him through 2 shifts of nursing staff, brought food for her mother, and helped organize the discharge paperwork. Christine called from out of state for 11 minutes and sent flowers that arrived after Robert had been discharged. At the follow-up family dinner, Diane thanked Christine first, and at length. She thanked Margaret by passing her the bread. The third event was quieter and in some ways more precise. Evelyn had asked, years before her death, that her jewelry be divided according to a handwritten note she kept with her important papers. The note specified clearly which piece went to whom. The locket with the lily went to Margaret. A pearl bracelet went to Christine. When Evelyn died on a Wednesday in March, the family handled the estate without legal oversight, as small estates sometimes are. Margaret received the pearl bracelet. She was told, gently, that there had been some confusion about the other pieces. She did not press it. She did not yet understand what had happened. The fourth event arrived as a text message on a Tuesday night. Margaret had been saving carefully for a year toward a down payment on a house. She had mentioned this to her mother at Easter. 6 weeks later, her mother sent a text, asking whether Margaret might consider lending Christine $4,000 toward a travel program in Italy. The program was a real opportunity, Diane explained. Christine had always been more of an experienced person than a savings person. And Margaret was so good at planning. The text ended with a heart. Margaret declined the loan by phone the following morning. Her mother said she understood, in the tone of someone who has decided not to understand at all. It was the 14th of April, a Saturday, when the final piece moved into place. Margaret had come to her parents' house to help her father organize the basement, a project he had mentioned at Christmas, and twice since. By noon they had made real progress. She went upstairs to wash her hands and passed the guest room, once her childhood room, and noticed the cedar box was not where she had left it. She checked the closet. She checked the bookcase. She stood in the middle of the room with her hands still damp. Then she went downstairs and asked her mother, casually, whether the box had been moved. Her mother did not look up from the shopping list on the counter. She said she had given it to Christine. Margaret asked when. Her mother said several months ago, before Christine left for the trip. Margaret set her hand on the counter. She asked whether the box had contained the locket. Her grandmother's locket. The one with the lily on the back. Her mother said, she thought so. She said it had been sitting in the room, doing nothing. She said Christine had admired it, and it seemed a shame for it to just sit there when it could be properly appreciated. Margaret stood in the kitchen for several seconds. The refrigerator hummed. Her father's footsteps moved around the basement below them. She said, very quietly, that the locket had been left to her by Evelyn, that it was hers, that she would need to get it back. Her mother said Christine was in Florence. Margaret said she understood. She picked up her coat from the chair. She said goodbye to her father through the basement door and walked out to her car. She did not slam the door. She sat in the driver's seat for a long time before starting the engine. She drove home with both hands on the wheel and all the windows down. She did not call Christine. She did not send her mother an email. She went home, made tea, and sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad. She wrote down what she knew. The locket had been given to her specifically and by name. She wrote down the date she had received it, the occasion, the words Evelyn had used. She wrote down the date she had left it at her parents' house, and the conversation that afternoon in the kitchen, as precisely as she could recall it. Then she began to find out what she did not know. She called the small independent jeweler 2 blocks from her grandmother's old house, the shop where Evelyn had occasionally had pieces cleaned and repaired, and explained that she believed a piece of her grandmother's jewelry may have been consigned without her knowledge. The jeweler, a quiet man named Arthur, asked her to come in. She brought 3 things: a photograph of herself wearing the locket, taken at her college graduation, the birthday card Evelyn had written the year she gave it, which Margaret had kept, because she kept birthday cards, and a copy of Evelyn's handwritten jewelry note which she had photographed on her phone at the time of the estate settlement, out of an instinct she could not have explained then, but understood now. Arthur studied the photograph carefully. He set it down and looked at her. He said a gold locket matching that description had been consigned to his shop 6 weeks prior. The consignment was in the name of Diane Calloway. The locket had not yet been sold, he said. Because he had been uncertain about the provenance, the engraving was unusual, and he had not been able to trace a clear ownership history. He asked whether she wanted to file a police report. She sat in the chair across from his counter and thought about what she actually wanted. She did not want a dramatic confrontation. She wanted the locket back. She wanted the behavior acknowledged. And she recognized this with a clarity that surprised her, to never again be in a position where her family could take something from her without consequence. She told Arthur she would like to pursue the proper process. He called the non-emergency police line. An officer arrived within 40 minutes. Margaret presented her documentation. He said this appeared straightforward. He asked whether her mother knew she was here. She said not yet. He said Diane would be informed when the report was filed that afternoon. Margaret thanked them both. She took a photograph of the locket where it sat on its velvet square in the display case, still with the lily facing up. Then she drove to her grandmother's old neighborhood and parked in front of the Craftsman bungalow, which belonged to a different family now. She sat there for a while. She thought about Tuesday phone calls and tin boxes of shortbread, and what it felt like to be seen clearly by one person when everyone else was looking somewhere else. She drove home. She made dinner. She slept without difficulty, which surprised her. She had thought it would be a hard night. If you have ever watched something irreplaceable disappear and been told you were overreacting, leave a word in the comments. Just one word is enough. The people reading down there will understand. The police report was filed on a Thursday. Her mother called on Friday evening. Margaret let it go to voicemail. The message was not an apology. It was a request, urgent and not gentle, that Margaret come to the house on Sunday to resolve this as a family before it became something unnecessary. Margaret drove over on Sunday with nothing except herself and a small folder in her bag. When she arrived, she found that her mother had assembled what Diane would have called a family conversation, but which more closely resembled an audience. Her father sat at the dining room table. Christine sat beside him. Her mother's sister was there, near the window. 2 neighbors who had known the family for over 20 years had apparently stopped by and been invited to stay. An older cousin, someone who had known Evelyn well, was also present. 11 people in the room. Margaret took the chair her father offered her, across from her mother. Diane spoke first. She said it had all been a misunderstanding. She said the locket had been in Margaret's old room for years, and she had not thought anyone wanted it. She said she had meant to give Christine a small piece of their grandmother's memory before the trip. Margaret let her finish. Then, she opened the folder. She placed the graduation photograph on the table, turning it so everyone across from her could see it. She placed the birthday card beside it, open to the page where Evelyn had written Margaret's name. She placed the copy of the jewelry note, with the line reading the locket with the lily on the back to Margaret, clearly visible. She placed the consignment form, with her mother's name and signature at the bottom. She said she understood that her mother had not meant for it to go this way. She said the locket had been given to her specifically and by name, and this was documented, and the documentation had been presented to the police, and a report had been filed. She said she was not interested in prosecution. She was interested in the return of her property. She said this without raising her voice. She said it the way someone reads a list of ingredients. The neighbor near the window leaned forward to look at the jewelry note. The older cousin said nothing, but her expression shifted in a way that was visible across the room. Christine said she had not known about the note. Her mother said she had thought it was informational. Margaret looked at her father, who had not spoken and whose color was not good. He said, quietly, that the locket would be returned. He said he was sorry. He said it to Margaret, not to the room. She gathered her documents back into the folder. She thanked her father. She said she hoped they could speak again once things had settled. Then she stood, said goodbye to the room, and walked out. She sat in her car in the driveway. A neighbor's dog was barking somewhere down the street. She sat for 3 full minutes. Then she drove to the jewelry shop and told Arthur the matter would be resolved without further proceedings, and that she would collect the locket Monday morning. He said Monday morning was fine. What do you think Margaret did next? Leave your thoughts below. Before the final part. The police report remained on file. Margaret had not asked for that. It simply existed, the way facts exist. Her mother called twice in the following week. Both calls went to voicemail. The messages were long and detailed in their explanation of how everything had happened for reasons that were reasonable at the time. Margaret did not respond. She was not angry. She was simply not ready, and she had learned that she was allowed to not be ready. The older cousin called separately. She said she had not known about the jewelry note, and that it sat uncomfortably with her. She wanted to have a proper conversation about what Evelyn had actually intended, when Margaret was ready. Christine sent a text 3 days after Sunday. It said only that she was sorry she had not known, and that she would have refused if she had. Margaret read it twice. She believed it. Her father came by her apartment on a Wednesday evening. Unannounced, he brought the locket in a small envelope. He stood at her door, handed it to her, and said he should have paid closer attention to what was happening in his own house. She let him in. She made coffee. They sat at her kitchen table for an hour and a half and talked in a way they had not talked since she was a child. It was halting and imperfect, and left several things unfinished. But it was real. The following month, on a Saturday in late May, Margaret had a small dinner at her apartment. The older cousin was there. A friend from work who had known her through some difficult years was there. Her father came, which was new. A neighbor who had become a steady presence brought bread she had baked herself, still warm when she arrived. The table was mismatched. 4 chairs that did not go together. A tablecloth from a market stall. 2 candles she had found in a drawer. The food was simple. The window was open, and the air outside smelled of cut grass and something faintly sweet she could not name. Margaret put on the locket that evening for the first time in over a year. She felt the small weight of it settle against her collarbone and thought, for a moment, about Evelyn deciding who deserved what, and writing it down in careful handwriting so there would be no confusion later. She had not known, at 17, what it meant that Evelyn had chosen her. She understood it now. Someone laughed across the table, and then someone else did, and the candles wavered in the draft from the window. Margaret picked up her glass. She did not make a toast. She simply looked at the people at her table and felt the specific warmth of knowing exactly where she was. The locket rested against her chest, neither heavy nor light, just present. It had been waiting 14 months in a jeweler's display case, on a square of velvet, patient in the way that objects belonging to particular people will sometimes wait to be returned to them. It was home now. So was she. If you have stayed to the end of this story, then you already know what Margaret knows. Some things are left to us with intention. They are left by people who saw us clearly and wanted to say so in a way that would last longer than words. When those things are taken, not by accident, not out of necessity, but out of the assumption that no one will notice or object, the taking is never really about the object. It is a statement about who is considered to matter. Margaret did not go to war over a necklace. She went to the trouble of being taken seriously. You are allowed to do that. You are allowed to document what is yours. You are allowed to speak quietly and carry your paperwork. You are allowed to let the room go still while you place the evidence on the table. You are allowed to say no to a loan that funds someone else's adventure while your own life waits on hold. You are allowed to accept a genuine apology while still choosing carefully who sits at your table, and you are allowed to wear what was given to you, without explanation and without apology. The people who truly love you will already understand. They always did. If this story held something for you, share it with someone who might need it tonight. And if you have a story of your own, a piece, a promise, a name on a document that someone decided was optional, leave it in the comments below. She is listening.